In this video, I traveled to the Owyhee Canyonlands in southeastern Oregon to meet with Eric Poulin, who is a long-distance hiker working his way through the 750-mile Oregon Desert Trail. And I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hey everybody, today we are at the Three Forks recreation area along the Owyhee River in southeastern Oregon, and joining us is Eric Poulin. Eric is a long-distance hiker, outdoor enthusiast, filmmaker, YouTuber, and blogger. He has completed the Continental Divide Trail in 2018. He created and hiked the Basin and Range Trail in 2020. He created and hiked the Mojave Sonoran Trail in 2021 and is currently hiking the Oregon Desert Trail. His videos can be found on his YouTube channel, Seeking Lost, and his film, Pioneering Nevada's Basin and Range Trail, can be found on Amazon Prime and other streaming services. And Eric joins us in the field today to talk a little bit about what he does.
How's it going?
Yeah, thanks for coming over.
Hey, thanks for having me for a beer.
Yeah, you bet. And of course today we're having some beers.
A couple of frosty props.
Yep. Little Trooper, little Pacifico.
Yep.
Both good ones. He has more hiking to do today, so this is just kind of a pit stop right now. Lunch and beer.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so you've done a lot of hiking. If you go over to his YouTube channel, you'll see that he's got all of these hikes that I've taught. Well, he doesn't have the Oregon Desert Trail hike yet, but you have a lot more than just these long hikes that you've done. You've done quite a few, and like the Wind Rivers seems like I've seen a pretty good one on the Wallowa Mountains. You know, you'll do these just small little follow-ups in addition to these.
Yeah, well, I'll do backpacking trips in between long hikes. I know some people seem to kind of work themselves into this niche where, you know, I'll only do a long hike, but I'm totally open to, you know, doing weekend trips, week-long trips. In fact, that's kind of the way to go with some of the places like the Wind River Range, you know, where you're just out there for 7 to 10 days and just, you know, nonstop excellent scenery for a week, and then, you know, call it a day. There's no reason to hike through the Great Divide Basin if you don't have to.
Yeah, if you don't have to, yeah. Yeah, I bet the Wind Rivers are a really good example. I really enjoyed that video. And what was the other one I liked that you'd done? The one in the Wallowa Mountains that's a really nice area, a nice region of Oregon. You started your YouTube channel, you started putting videos up. What were a lot of your motivations behind doing that? And then what are your motivations just to do these through hikes, or even to scout your own, you know, through hike out in the wilds here and go and hike that for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I started out hiking just doing, you know, overnight trip, you know, weekend trip, week-long trip, and that was sort of the progression for me, and I did that for, you know, 8 or 9 years, and then I just kind of got settled into the job I was at, you know, and I felt like I was on this hamster wheel, and I had always known about the CDT, and it really spoke to me, this, you know, the states that it goes through and the landscapes it traverses, and it had been this goal of mine for all these years. And, you know, one day I kind of just asked myself, I said, you know, what's the biggest thing you've ever done with your life? And I couldn't really answer that, you know, and it kind of scared me. So things kind of fell into place. All of a sudden I sold my house, I quit my job, and just went for it, and I did the CDT, you know. And the motivation was just to have something that you could point to say, you know, this was the best thing I ever did with my life. And then, of course, you finish, and then you say, well, how can that be the only one? I can't go back to, you know, the hamster wheel again, right? So, yeah, then it becomes addicting, and then, you know, you seek it out more and more, and then you're kind of chasing that dragon, essentially, right? It's you know, you might not get that same feeling from that next one, so you might have to, you know, step it up a little bit, make a progression and everything, and that was sort of the motivation to do the Basin and Range Trail. I think over the CDT was just to get out there and do something that was, you know, just on your own, really, where you weren't following somebody else's footsteps. You're creating your own. You don't know how it's going to work out, you know?
Yeah.
So
when you were planning your route and your hike with the Basin and Range Trail, you, of course, had never really planned anything that big before. You had to go through and locate water sources and run your hike through convenient resupply places. There were a lot of logistics you had to figure out. How long did it take? What was the process like? Putting all that stuff together.
Yeah, it was probably a good 2 or 3 months of really, really solid work to have it all come together. And I'd kind of had like some base knowledge of the area from some other route plans that I had, just kind of in the works. And I think that helped me I at least get the ball rolling. But as far as, just really doing the nuts and bolts of all the planning, it's kind of a combination of identifying where you want to go, because Nevada is such a vast place, 314 mountain ranges, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of kind of putting all these dots on the map and saying, this is a place I want to go to in this place. And then trying to string them all together, and then you kind of realize, all right, well, I'm sort of confined to the resupply options, which are a little bit slim in Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
So then you start plotting out, where are the towns, where are the buildings?
Yeah, where are the buildings?
Because it's kind of how it is. There's some places where it's just one building there, and then maybe a gas station in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And if that business owner is okay with you sending a box there, then you're golden. And if he's not, then you're gonna have to try something else. So then it became our time to just call these business owners and say, hi, I'm doing this. This is a weird question, I'm doing this 2-month-long hike through Nevada, and I'm going to be passing through your town, and it doesn't look like you guys have a grocery store, so I'd like to stay at your motel. I don't know when, I can't make a reservation, but I'd like to send a box full of food there. Is that cool? And they're like, what are you doing again?
Yeah.
But most of them were cool with it, and they kind of got the gist of it, and they would just say, yeah, okay, that sounds pretty interesting, and yeah, sure. So
yeah. Now, tell us about the one that you ran into in, was it Austin? Because she's had some experience with some of this before.
So I had, there was actually one motel called the Cozy Mountain Motel in Austin, and I called up the hotel, and I kind of asked the same question I just discussed here, and she says, that's really cool, and I'm a former PCT thru-hiker myself, and wasn't expecting this out in the middle of Nevada, in this tiny little town, but she was more than happy to do what she could to help me out, and it was a great town stop. I ended up, going to hike out to, when I left Austin, it was a 25-mile hike or whatever it was out of town, and I got to Spencer Hot Springs, and then the owner of the motel and the girl that worked there, they came out to Spencer Hot Springs that night with me and had
nice.
a soak and brought me a gallon of water, and
excellent.
so it's just the way things work out sometimes. It's really great.
On that note, one of the things that I enjoyed particularly about the pioneering the Nevada's Basin and Range Trail, and there are 2 versions of it. He has it broken up into 10 different segments, and each one of those runs maybe an hour to an hour and a half. And then, of course, he has the complete edited version that is only about an hour long. It skips through everything really quick. But if you're really looking for an immersive experience, you've got 10 hours of hiking through the Basin and Range along that trail. And if you're planning to go on a hike like that, it's a great resource, because he takes you through a lot of, you'll just kind of get to see what the lay of the land is. So you were out there. The one thing I was kind of surprised was your interaction with the locals, because a lot of these people were, they were curious, they were friendly. They said, well, hey, take a day off, come hang out with us. Tell us about some of that.
Yeah, so, I think everybody, in the thru-hiking world is somewhat familiar with trail angels and trail magic and that kind of thing. And it's, on the Appalachian Trail, it would be expected, right? On the CDT, it's a little bit more like, I hope I run into one. And on a route that you just create out of, from scratch, there's no expectations, so
Mm-hmm.
any kind of interaction you have with people, nobody knows what you're doing. But I did meet a lot of people that were just really willing to kind of drop what they were doing and help me out, and just wanted to learn more about what I was doing and everything. And, I had so I ran into the Terrace family in the Monitor Range. It was 4th of July, and I remember waking up that day and saying, "Oh, 4th of July, it's a holiday. Okay, well, I'm going to be hiking." And I'm walking along, and I run into a 4-wheeler, and they tried their hardest to convince me and have steak and beer with them. And I was like, man, I got to cover these miles. And finally, they twisted my arm, and I joined. It was just a great experience, just to be able to relax on a holiday with a family, and just kind of have that campfire experience, and just have that human interaction. So, and then a couple of weeks later, I'd kept in contact with Cody, one of the guys I met there, and he was able to pick me up from the trailhead, take me into Lamoille, from Lamoille into Elko and resupply, and then he came out and hiked with me for the next 36 hours.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Now you've had a couple of people decide to go hiking with you that you met.
Yep, there was another rancher in the Pequops that I'd met, and this is actually one of the best timing, I think, of all these experiences I had, because I remember I was walking out of the town of Wells, and it was a really hot day. It was probably in the mid-90s, and normally I handle heat pretty well, but on this day I really didn't, and it was just whooping my ass. I was just feeling really, really rough, had some cramps, and just was just not having it that day. And I get to a water source late at night, and there's this swamp, and I'm trying to figure out how to get water from this thing. And then, all of a sudden I hear a motor, and I see this guy on a dirt bike approach, and he's got a weed whacker across his lap. And he says, hey, I didn't expect to see a hiker out here. And turns out this guy, he's got a ranch in the area, and he maintains mountain biking trails that are on MTB project. If you look up the Pequops and the MTB project, he's got the trails there, and that's what he was doing. He's maintaining them with his weed whacker. So yeah, he was really surprised to see a hiker, and it was a very quick progression from just kind of being interested in what I was doing to well, you're welcome to camp at my ranch. And then that turned into, well, you could stay inside in the bed and have a shower, and well, you should probably join us for dinner, and maybe I could come hike with you tomorrow. So the next day he did. He got the dogs out, and he did an overnight hike with me, and it was really great. And those are the kind of things that you really remember, I think, on a hike, because when you just hike all day, I mean, the scenery's great, but when you have such few human interactions like that, and to just see the way that people want to help you, and they're generous and just interested in what you're doing, it's just a really good feeling to have those kind of experiences on a hike. And it just provides a little bit of variety, I think, that really makes a long hike, a complete experience.
Yeah. I really I enjoyed that segment with the rancher that you hiked with in the Pequops, and when he went up to the plane wreck. There's an old plane wreck up on one of the peaks in the Pequops, and yeah, that was an interesting piece of trivia I didn't know about. So when you were out on the Basin and Range, you had oftentimes, a week or so before you'd be into town or getting a resupply, where it was just you in unfamiliar country with no trails. Like how did you deal with the being alone for as long as you were? How'd you deal with the solitude?
Yeah, so I think just in non-hiking life, you have good days and bad days, and I think when the scenery's good and the walking's easy, and the sun's shining, and you've got your good day, and you're not really thinking too much about being isolated or whatever. And I think when you really start dwelling on the fact that you're alone, or is maybe the times when the scenery isn't so good, and it's maybe you're road walking or doing a cross-country segment across this valley through sagebrush, and then you might start dwelling on just anything. It's weird, the things that pop into your mind, regrets that you have, friends that you've lost contact with or whatever, and you just think of just all these random things that pop into your mind, and then you've got all day to your mind will just kind of explore that, But generally the isolation itself didn't really bother me per se. It was just, certain days would just wear on you, I would say, and I think that was more of a product of the environment than anything else.
Yeah. So when you were doing the Basin and Range trip, did you have a favorite section? You know, was there one that you liked? You know, I know a lot of, you know, as someone has watched all these videos a couple of times, you know, I have a hard time picking a favorite because you've got really nice footage and the experience and the narration, everything is, you know, done really well. But you know, what's one of your favorites, or what section?
And it's tough to answer. I think it's a loaded question because I think I've got different attachments to different sections for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're just talking on pure scenery or whatever, I mean, hikeability was one thing that was really nice when you finally get to a legitimate trail such as the Ruby Crest Trail or the Owyhee Crest Trail. Those were really enjoyable for that reason because you could just actually just sit there and hike, you know?
Yes.
Yep. So, but yeah, different sections have different things that I think I took away from it that you know might have been my favorite, I guess, because human interaction. I think the hiking with the rancher and then hiking with the having my interaction with the Terrace family were some of my favorite human interactions as far as just pure scenery. Even that's a tough thing to just narrow it down to. But I think the one thing I think that the one that's on the top of my mind is the go shoots because I didn't expect much out of it. There was nothing written online about it. There's no photos online of this part of the go shoots. So it's just completely unknown. And then, you know, get up to the ridge line and you've got the Bonneville Salt Flats, you know, which is basically huge expanse to the east, you know, to the horizon, this massive salt flat just glows in the sunlight. And you've got the Go Shoot Valley on the other side, and there's this approaching rainstorm where lightning's happening in the distance, and then you've got Pilot Peak over there to the north, just looks like Mount Rainier, like a big volcano. And then here you are walking on these limestone cliffs with, you know, 1,500 foot drop off. And yeah, the Go Shoots were one place that are really at the top of my, you know, list, I think. But I would also say the Rubies were up there, and the Toyabees, the Diamonds, the Grant Range. I could go on. You know, it's hard to say.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir right now. So so much of that area is really, really nice. So when you were doing the Basin and Range trip, how long were some of your days? You know, like how many hours did you put in hiking on some of these?
There's usually a couple more hours than I was thinking because by the time you get ready to camp and then there's nowhere to camp and then you're hiking another hour and a half, I had some 14-hour days, you know, and it was just sun up to sundown. And, you know, thankfully it was summer where I had that amount of time to cover the miles. But they're not easy miles, you know. You're either going uphill or bushwhacking or both, you know. There's very, very infrequently was there an actual hiking trail, only in a couple of ranges. And, yeah, there were some really, really long days.
So when you were out there, you didn't cache any water for the Basin and Range Trail. You relied on water sources that you had to locate, make sure that they were reliable, and you could get to them in whatever reasonable time you needed or interval you had, you know, between when, you know, you ran out of water and, you know, like how many miles you had to hike. How did all that work out for you? Where did you find that information? And, you know, how reliable were all these water sources for you when you did find them?
Yeah, so water sources were one of those things that, I told people I'm doing a hike through central Nevada in the middle of the summer, and they said, you know, you're going to die. And, it really wasn't as dire as people made it out to be. There was a lot more water sources out there, a lot of natural water sources too. A lot of these ranges had flowing creeks, and I was really surprised at how green, you know, pockets of it were, because from the road, a lot of it looks brown and kind of bland, you know, some of these ranges. But once you really get up there and start to get into it, water sources really weren't that big of a deal. Now, the way I found them was basically with the USGS topo maps, and I would locate the springs, of course the rivers, you know, and then flip over to satellite map and just try and see, like, is it green or not, you know? And if you just see something that's marked as a spring and there's no sign of green around it, you can pretty much write it off. It's not going to be it's not going to have any water. Now, sometimes you see some green vegetation around it. Sometimes you see a line of green vegetation downhill of it, downhill of the spring, and that would indicate that there's some sort of run going on. Water's trickling out of this thing. And then, I would assign all these a probability, some sort of probability of having water. So I would give my water sources little icons, and I would do black for dry, green for maybe, and then blue for, it's a lake or something very, very certain. And I was really surprised because I want to say 2 or 3 of the water sources out of the whole route didn't work out for me. So, something like 95, 98% of the time I was right. And that made me feel really good and gives you a little bit of confidence in what you're doing, is you're on the right track, and your system and your method works. And now I'm gonna take this and apply it to future hikes, and I have that skill that you've built for yourself, and you've been able to kind of ground truth what you think is there to what is actually there. So that's a really great feeling.
Now, some of these water sources were wildlife guzzlers or modified springs for cattle. I mean, you pretty much you had to factor in any water source while you're out there.
Yeah, and then there's you're right. There's wells and troughs and things, and those are kind of the unknown because you could look at it from satellite, and what you're seeing on satellite is only a snapshot of time, because generally if I see cattle on the satellite, I'm thinking, well, there's definitely going to be water there. But it depends at what time of the year the local rancher there has his cattle there. So if you're just not there at the time, he could have his cattle there in May or November, and I don't know when the satellite photo is taken.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. It's the beer.
Yep. And then so the guzzlers, the troughs and the wells were sort of the unknown. Anything that's related to cattle. They generally worked out for me that year. But then there was guzzlers, and I really only utilized 4 guzzlers along the way. And one of them was a pretty critical one in the coming out of the Grant Range. And those all had water, and it was a pretty dry year as well for Nevada. And they had water. Nice. So I was really happy with the way water sources worked out.
So we're going to switch to a slightly different angle that you took on your Sonoran or Mojave Sonoran Trail trip. For that one, you ended up hiking in and caching water in certain areas, because that's an even drier region than the Basin and Range. So
it is,
you had to be creative.
Yeah, and I cached maybe 3 times.
Okay. And
there'd be some roads that I could access pretty close to where I was going, and then maybe you had to hike in a mile or 2, and just find a little alcove or a cave or just some under some rocks or something, and drop yourself a gallon of water, and it really helped out. Now the rest of the route, beyond the areas that I cached, was definitely drier. There's practically no flowing creeks. The best you're going to hope for is just a puddle and a spring and that kind of thing. And I mean, I found water where when I needed it, but there was definitely some times where I was thirstier than I would have preferred. One section comes into mind. I think it was south of Searchlight. I did a 54. It was like 52 miles of hiking on 5 liters of water over 2.5 days.
Wow.
Including climbing Spirit Mountain, because I didn't want to miss it. That's the high point of the Mojave Sonoran Trail, so I said, I don't care how thirsty I am.
Is it really?
It is.
I didn't know that was the actual high point. Awesome.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
So I couldn't pass it up, and I said, I don't care how thirsty I am, I'm going to do this anyway. So.
Yeah, that's a nice mountain. I'd spent some time in the area back in January. It was kind of the first time I was out there getting myself familiar with it. And I was pleasantly surprised. It's really pretty there, really nice
really
country.
Jagged spires and everything, and it was just very unique, especially compared to everything else in the area.
Yeah, that was the thing, really unique. So when you, how long did it take you to put together the Mojave Sonoran Trail, as opposed to how long it took you to put together the Basin and Range Trail?
Yeah, so the Mojave Sonoran Trail is interesting because I only spent about 2 weeks putting together that route, a
2 weeks, huh?
625 mile route. And most of that was just because of my time frame, whereas I just had more time with the Basin and Range Trail. So had I had more time, I might have spent more time doing it, but I was pretty set on wanting to do a hike in the late fall kind of time frame, you know? And at the time, you know, there really wasn't any other options. So I was, you know, just looking at this region to put something together here. And yeah, I just 2 weeks I went for it, started drawing my line. Now the thing that made it easier compared to the Basin and Range Trail was that the Basin and Range Trail could have gone in any direction. You know, it's a vast area, and you're really choosing from all these different places. Now, the concept of the Mojave Sonoran Trail was already, I guess, known to me, where like I got the idea for it basically looking at a heat map of the elevation in the southwest, and you can see the Colorado River corridor just pops out at you, being the lowest elevation in the whole region. And it's all interconnected. It's a river, so you know it's just a line. And I looked at that and I said, well, that's where I'm going to do my hike, is along the river. Not necessarily close enough to draw water from it, unfortunately, but there's some spectacular mountain ranges that parallel it. So I didn't have to think about all the what ifs of the Basin and Range Trail. It was a very obvious route, you know. I'm just going to follow this shoreline. So then it's more of a matter of, you know, well, which canyon are you going to take? Are you going to hike this ridge line instead of which mountain range are you going to hike? So that kind of helped keep the time down a little bit, you know, as far as planning. But also it was just a progression, I think, from the Basin and Range Trail, knowing that I'm not, you know, as afraid of running out of water, or you've just grown your skill set from having one under your belt already. And I was able to kind of do it faster.
So when you were putting that trip together, you of course, most of this was happening on a combination of different public lands. You had a state park, you've got the Lake Mead Recreation Area, a couple wilderness areas. As you were putting all of these together, occasionally you go through private sections. You know, there was one where you did a little urban exploration. Tell us about that a little bit.
So yeah, that was the Echo Bay Marina there, Echo Bay Campground. And, you know, Lake Mead's water level, I think we're all kind of aware now. It's not just local news, but it's national news, what's going on in the Colorado River corridor at the water. And Lake Mead's water levels are dropping pretty rapidly. And Echo Bay is just a great example of what's going on there, because, you know, you had this motel and restaurant and everything that was thriving just, you know, a couple decades ago, I guess. And when the water level was higher, you know, it was a popular boat launch, and, you know, the water went all the way up almost to this restaurant and everything. But now, you know, with the water level as far down as it is, I mean, they can barely use the boat launch. And in fact, they've closed the boat launch, you know, since I've done the Mojave Sonoran Trail. And that abandoned hotel restaurant was just one of the relics left behind, and just a reminder of that. So, you know, you come into this campground here and it feels like a ghost town. There's one tiny little store, you know, it's the most pathetic selection that you could imagine.
It was actually open, huh?
They had a store that was technically still open.
Wow.
It used to be a gas station. I don't think you could get gas there anymore. I believe it was Sinclair. But you walk into this store, and I mean, I'm not kidding, it's a shelf that's, you know, just you could only put a couple of candy bars and a few bags of chips on it, and that's it. I mean, it was very, very slim pickings. But same parking lot, yeah, you've got that abandoned building, and yeah, I sure as hell went inside that thing and checked it out. And checked out all the cool graffiti in there, and yeah, that was
unexpected.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was unexpected. So when you were out in the Mojave Sonoran Trail, what kind of encounters with wildlife did you have out there?
You know, I saw a lot of bighorn sheep outside of Las Vegas. That area is just, I guess, prime habitat for them. And the Jimbledan Wilderness. So yeah, that one just rolls off the tongue, huh?
It stands for Jim, Bill, and Nancy, and evidently they were the three people that advocated for that section to be
Exactly, yeah.
designated
When
wilderness?
they name a wilderness, they have to come up with a name.
You said you saw a lot of bighorn sheep outside of Vegas.
Yep, in the Lake Mead National Recreation Area, there was tons of bighorn sheep. I would see 20 or 30 a day at times,
Wow.
especially in the Jimblenan area. Other than that, there were some areas that had a lot of burro.
Mm-hmm.
Probably near Oatman, also in the
yeah.
Black Range, but in the Arizona side.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really see rattlesnakes or anything, not at that time of the year. I saw, just a couple non-poisonous snakes.
Seems like you saw a big tarantula.
Did see a couple of tarantulas. Yep, I saw 2, and no scorpions. So it was actually a pretty good time of the year to be there in terms of not seeing the stuff that you don't want to see.
Yeah.
And then the bighorns were pretty active.
Yeah. Yeah. You had at one point you found a pretty nice skull with complete horns on it that was laying out there in the desert. That was a pretty neat looking find there.
Yeah.
Probably didn't pack it out though. A little too heavy.
Yeah, a little too heavy. Little forbidden in the national recreation area
yeah,
too.
that's
I think.
right. I guess they don't let you go in there and collect that stuff, huh?
Usually stuff that has national in it is pretty much off limits.
Yeah. So when you were doing the Mojave Sonoran Trail, you did this in November and December last year. That's getting close to wintertime. The light's going away. You only had so much to work with. How did that all work out for you?
Especially after that daylight's losing time, because man,
Yeah.
once that hit, it was just,
Yeah.
it got dark at 5. So
yeah.
it was definitely hard to get the miles in, and that's just part of hiking at that time of the year. I think a lot of long distance hikers want to get those 20 miles in, and you don't feel accomplished unless you got 20 miles in. But I got to tell you, there was a lot of days I didn't get 20 miles in. It was, if you get 17 or 18, that's a pretty solid day, especially when you're doing off-trail hiking,
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely a matter of sun up to sundown, and you get up just as the sun's rising, and I would hike basically till the sun has already gone past the horizon. Start looking for camp.
Yeah, and the sun drops down really quickly, during that time of the year too. You have pretty much, up in Alaska, I kind of get used to the period between when the sun actually gets below the mountains and when it actually gets dark is usually an hour and a half, maybe even more. That twilight lasts a long time, even in the wintertime. But boy, down here, that sun starts going down at 5, and by 5:30 it is dark.
That's it too. Yeah, you're looking at the Milky Way here, and just 30 to 45 minutes after sundown. So.
Yeah, it's pretty dramatic.
The good thing about that though is that you just get all the rest you can get, because in a summer hike, when there's barely 8 or 9 hours of darkness, when you're hiking all day long, by the time you set up your camp and you're eating and maybe doing your journal or checking maps of the next day or whatever you got to do, I mean, it's hard to get 8 hours of sleep. But out there, I mean, I was getting 11 hours of sleep a night, and it was great.
Nice, yeah.
And you need it,
So when you're out here on these trips, you'll have periodic what you call 0 days, where you just take a day off. You're often staying in a small hotel in some small town way out in the middle of nowhere. Often you have to hitch a ride to get to those places. How has that gone for you? What's like the longest you've ever had to sit on the side of the highway with your thumb out?
Yeah, it's probably maybe 3 hours. I don't want to say that was on the CDT on Bannock Pass, Idaho Montana border, getting a ride into I think it was Lima. I think it was Lima or Lador. Now I'm struggling to remember, but recent times I would say, man, I remember trying to get a hitch on the Basin and Range Trail. It was probably out there for a solid 2 hours, and it was just a big trucking route, and I was trying to get a ride into this small community of Preston, and I was getting a little bit desperate, so I took my Tyvek, and I had a magic marker. I flip it over, and the Tyvek is my ground sheet underneath my tent, and it's just a big white, piece of material, and I wrote, something like, hiker to town, need ride, please help, whatever, and lady comes, I see a car drive by, the first one after I've written this, and I'm trying to get this thing up in display what I've written, but the wind is whipping so hard that the thing's just going all over the place. So finally I just give up and shove it under my arm and put my thumb out, and she drives by, and I was just kind of devastated at that point, and the sun's going down, and I'm just really, really ready to get to town. So I'm kind of doing one of these like, oh no, and she about a minute later she goes over the hill, and then she turns around and comes back and picks me up, and she says, hey, you need a ride to town? And it's like, yeah. She said, well, I figured you must really need a ride if you're writing whatever it was that you were writing and trying to get that sign up there.
Uh-huh.
And it turns out we went to the same high school together in Michigan, just 10 years apart. But
Wow.
I mean, just what a small world,
Yeah, huh, that is interesting, especially way out there under those circumstances in the middle of nowhere, Nevada.
Yeah, for sure.
Anybody that's been watching your videos, one of the things that I like about a lot of them is you take a certain amount of time to set up your shots. You understand the role of good cinematography in what you're doing, and you take the time to set up certain shots and certain camera angles for when you're out doing certain things. And do you have any like a particular method that you use all the time? Do you have like a pattern you look for ABC to put those out? Is it just random? And how much time do you spend when you're doing these kind of things? Because you have to set your camera up, walk back, then do the shot, then come back and get the camera. There's a lot of different angles to it. So how do you work all of that stuff when you're out there?
I probably spend about an hour a day filming, just on the average. Of course, if it's more scenic, then I'm probably going to spend more time.
You're talking like an hour of footage per day?
And maybe just an hour of my time between setting stuff up and then, the time that it would take to, hike there and back, and then, just stopping to mess with the camera and change batteries and do all the stuff that you got to do to film. And I do find myself sort of noticing patterns and stuff. I think it's probably just from doing it, repeatedly, I start to realize certain shots that I like, and maybe certain orders, and certain sequences that might be good, from leaving camp, or things like that. But it's not something that I did consciously from the beginning. I think it was just more or less, okay, I've done a few videos and I kind of like the way that this is presented, and then you find yourself subconsciously, I guess, working with patterns and routines and stuff like that. And then now I'm starting to notice them, as I do it more.
So when you get all of this footage, how much footage did you get from the Basin and Range Trail? How many hours?
I think I had 52 hours of footage.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then how many for the Sonoran Mojave?
37.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's a lot to have to get. What's your method? What kind of software do you use to work all this stuff with?
I use Adobe Premiere Pro.
Okay.
And yeah, I would say it probably takes about as long as it takes to hike the hike. It takes that amount of time to edit it. So if it's a 2-month hike, it takes 2 months to edit it.
Yeah, a lot of time there in front of the computer to get us what we get to see on YouTube. Huh?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so now most of your video, you've shot all of these on various GoPro models, right?
Yeah, GoPro, as well as just whatever still camera I was using at the time.
Okay.
And I had a crop sensor Sony mirrorless camera, the Nex 7 model. I was using for a while, and then the GoPros would outpace that in terms of technology, so I wouldn't want to use the footage from my Sony camera and then upscale it, so then I stopped using that. But now I've recently upgraded my still camera, so that's got 4K, and the GoPro has 4K, and they're on the same plane. They work well together, so now I'm incorporating those a little bit more. And the good thing about that is I can use zoom lens more and kind of get the wildlife shots, or maybe zoom in on for example, in this hike I'm hiking with another hiker named Donnie, and I've got some shots of him walking up the valley or whatever from, you know, really far away, but the background looks huge, you know, with this big mountain. And, you know, those kind of shots are really cool. And it's a great thing about hiking with somebody is that you can, you're not trying to film yourself, you know, for one. But also I don't have to walk and get my camera, you know,
Right.
as much.
Yeah. Yeah, whenever I'm doing that, it confuses the dogs because they're like, wait a minute, we just walked over here. Why are we going back? And yeah. So you have your YouTube channel, you have a blog, and you have a good amount of subscribers, and there seems to be a fairly regular group that you interact with on YouTube. What's it been like dealing with the social media? You know, do you ever deal with trolls at all, or most people, you know, there because they're interested and curious about what you're doing? You know.
Yeah, I think most people are pretty cool about it. I mean, I don't do a whole lot of gear videos and stuff, and I think that's probably the thing where trolls are more apt to, you know, because everybody's got an opinion on what the best gear is, and honestly, that's a large part of why I don't really bother with it. Yeah, but no, generally, no, I don't. I'm not dealing with a whole bunch of trolls or anything like that. Every now and then you get somebody that just, you know, but it's pretty rare. I think most people are just, you know, pretty interested in what the content is, you know, and the places that I'm showing, because I try and go to places that are a little bit off the beaten path. So yeah, it's generally a pretty positive interaction. Yeah.
Do you get any you know, companies wanting you to use their products? Any of that kind of attention?
Only Chinese companies that have something you've never heard of. Generally,
okay.
yeah. If I had Patagonia and you know, North Face or whatever knocking at my door, it'd be different. But from my understanding, those companies don't really even need to do any kind of marketing like that. Even the biggest YouTube people don't typically get those kind of things. But you know, I'll get emails about you know, hey, test our kids inflatable kayak thing, or you know, just all these things that are pretty far off of what I'm actually doing, you know. And
so with the gear, you know, particularly we'll talk here, since this is mostly about, you know, putting together a YouTube video. Have you had any problems with any of the camera gear? Any malfunctions, configurations that didn't work out for you? Things you felt worked better than others, you know? And where did you finally land and why?
Yeah, so I've had some. Well, I lost microphones a couple on the Basin and Range Trail and some of the bushwhacks, and you know, I was using on my GoPro the Pro Audio adapter thing, where it's, you know, it's a larger cage that houses this adapter, and then you can plug in a microphone and put a dead cat on it, and it, you know, I didn't really notice that it gave me better quality audio per se, but what I did notice was that it introduced a whole nother series of issues where, you know, the audio jack would get corroded or something, and then I had, you know, a whole 6 or 7 hours worth of footage where all of the audio just sounds like a crackling, you know, so it was just unusable. So I've kind of deleted that setup and have just gone to maybe doing any audio correction post edit, and I think that has kind of simplified the process a little bit more with the camera. And then, you know, the other upgrades I mentioned previously about, you know, just upgrading to a full frame Sony camera was really nice, and just being able to use a zoom lens and everything again has been very beneficial.
When you're out there, you obviously go lightweight, or as lightweight as you can. I think you had mentioned your pack usually weighs around, what, 30 pounds?
Well, I've got a 12-pound base weight, so then it just sort of depends on food and water, and then, you know, camera gear and all that. But around 12 pounds is roughly my base weight.
And so, like, when you go out on these trips and you're planning your meals, and he has a video about how he eats out here, that if you want a good dive into it, I'll put a link right up here to that video you can go and check out. But yeah, talk about it a little bit for us.
So I think when people talk about hiking and what they eat, I think everybody kind of knows the same, you know, protein bars and Cliff bars and granola bars and dried fruit and nuts and stuff. And yeah, I eat all that stuff too. I would say though that my staple meals, instead of doing like, you know, bringing a stove and cooking rice or ramen noodles or whatever, I just find it easier to do a no cook, no cold soak diet. And I just typically eat tortillas, and I'll if they have them, I'll get the 100% whole wheat tortillas, and then just do a couple of cheese sticks instead of the shredded cheese. It's a little easier to just have a cheese stick, and then either pepperoni or pre-cooked bacon, and just make a wrap out of that. And you know, it tastes good, and you know, all that stuff keeps really well in the heat, and most stores have it, so it makes it pretty good, pretty easy solution, you know.
Nice.
You don't have to clean any dishes. You don't need any extra water, which is especially great for hiking in the desert.
Yeah. Saves you a lot of weight and space too, because you're not carrying a stove and fuel and having to mess with all that kind of stuff too.
Yes and no. I think the downside of this diet is that it's probably bulkier. It takes up more space because, you know, dehydrated food is a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm not carrying the water, or not tied to being next to water, but the food itself is definitely bulkier and heavier. But it's a drawback, and you know, pros and cons to everything. But I just like the simplicity of being able to, you know, when you're done hiking at the end of a day, all I got to do is reach in my bag and make this quick thing without boiling water and cleaning a pot, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's nice and easy.
Yeah.
For sure. You take a lot of pictures. I followed you on Instagram for the last year or so, and I really enjoy your photography. You had one particular picture that you took on the Basin and Range trip you did a couple of years ago. Tell us about that one particular picture and who was interested in it and why.
Yeah, so the Goshute Range, as I mentioned earlier, was one of those places that just really surprised me and was, you know, kind of stood out, I think, at the end of the hike as one of my favorite spots. And yeah, it was a very photogenic ridgeline. There's no way around it. There was just this one scene, I guess, where, and it's typical Basin and Range topographies where, you know, one side of the mountain may be slanted at such an angle, you know, it's a gentle slope, and then it just steeply drops off on the other side. And it was kind of the case here. It was a little bit more rolling green hills, I think, in that one segment there, but it was almost like, you know, two slopes coming up together like that. And oddly enough, just one day I get an email from the Nevada Department of Mines and Geology, and they had seen the photos, and they said, you know, we're doing a calendar, and it'd be really nice if you would submit these to our calendar. We need some more photos of stuff like this. I said, okay, sure. So I sent them a big dump of photos, and I got 2 of the months in the calendar, and then the cover photo.
Nice.
For the calendar. So, and then they reached out to me again for their calendar for this year, and sent them another one from the Mojave Sonoran Trail, and they're going to include another one from that trip. So
that's really good news. Yeah, the one that got selected for the cover of the calendar is one of my favorite pictures he's taken. It's perfectly encapsulates so much of what I like about the Basin and Range area. It was really nice. So what are you doing right now?
So right now I'm doing the Oregon Desert Trail. It's a 750-mile route. It's not really a trail the whole way. And yeah, it starts in Bend, and it goes to the Owyhee Canyonlands, the Owyhee Reservoir. And it kind of forms like a W shape. It's a very interesting route that it takes. It's a route and not a trail. It's definitely not a hiking trail the whole way. About 1/3 of it is cross country, so it's been a very challenging route. And right now we're in the middle of the Owyhee Canyonlands, which is just an outstanding, incredible place that, you know, I think everybody that needs to see it, to appreciate
definitely.
it. There's a lot of interesting things about this place that could be said, but the ODT has been a very difficult route, and you get to see a lot of unique Oregon backcountry. A lot of very difficult terrain that you probably wouldn't hike otherwise, because when you're connecting two different maybe mountain ranges, and then it has you going through some dried lake beds and salt flats and things like that. It's an interesting place to find yourself. But yeah, so I've got about another week and then I'll be done with this hike.
And you've had some pretty challenging weather along the way too.
Yeah, I never knew what the term atmospheric river was until this spring. So yeah, I think they've also been calling it January.
January,
Yeah, it's June, but we've been getting January weather.
Yeah.
In fact, it was 3 days ago. Today is the 17th of June. It was June 14th, and I had a 20-degree night. It was one of the coldest nights on the trip.
Wow.
So and then, the day and a half later, it was 90 degrees.
Yeah.
So it's been very challenging, a lot of wet weather, a lot of rain, and kind of miserable at times.
And so you have what, you said 140 miles left?
Yeah, I think 130 or so from here, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so from here, that'll put you out close to what, Ontario and Nampa?
Yep.
Kind of in that area?
We've got the Friends of the Owyhee is an organization that is, that advocates for the protection, I guess, of this land and everything here in the Owyhees. And they're kind enough to pick up ODT hikers at the finish line and drive them into Ontario.
Excellent.
So that's how I'm going to get my ride, because I want to say it's 30 or 40 minutes to the nearest town. So they'll pick me up, take me into Ontario. I'll take a bus from there to Boise and fly out the next day.
So you'll be done with this. You'll get whisked away out of the wilderness on a jet plane back to northern Michigan, right?
Yep.
And what do you have? What are your plans next? What do you have coming up after this?
So when I get home, I've got about 2 weeks, and then I'm headed out to Greenland for the summer.
Greenland, huh?
Yeah, so it's going to be a completely different experience for me. Just bought my first pack raft. I've got 2 buddies coming with me, and we're doing 2 months of hiking and pack rafting across Greenland.
Wow.
So it'll be southwestern Greenland, I guess, and we'll be pretty much on the western coast. We'll make our way up to the pretty much the Arctic Circle by the end of it.
So what town are you starting in, and can you pronounce it?
Don't make me pronounce stuff in Greenland. Let's see, we're flying into Narsarsuaq, and the town we're flying out of is called Kangerlussuaq. Yeah.
All right.
So I'm gonna be I'll probably blend in just fine. They're gonna be like, hey, you're born and raised here, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you'll be able to pronounce them after you've been there, so the locals will school you.
God, I hope.
Well, they got some challenging words, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So 2 months out there, and do you have any, are there any other future trails that you are, thinking about picking out a new route for? Do you have any of that kind of stuff you're working on?
So I'm always working on some new trails. I just don't have any that are ready to really say, like, I'm going to do this yet. But I've definitely got a solid 5 or so that are just sort of in the works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the only other really route that I'm kind of considering right now that would be a little bit more serious would be the another iteration of the Mojave Sonoran Trail. And the route goes from roughly Las Vegas to Yuma along the Colorado River corridor, and I had thought about extending it into St. George, Utah to the north, and I think the seasonality of that would be just fine. So I got to do a little bit more planning on that, and I think that would fit a winter hike pretty well to just do something else for the winter. I don't know that I would do the whole MST again, but at least I would do that section. The other thing I'm considering doing that I would probably do it again just to make it one complete route would just be to do a complete loop around Lake Mead. And the Lake Mead National Recreation Area is massive.
Yeah.
I mean, I hiked about 275 miles through.
Just in that one, huh?
Mostly through it, because in Valley of Fire was technically its own thing and all that. But you could do a circle around it and it would be 500 plus miles, I'm sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
then I could probably throw in the pack raft in there and pack raft across Lake Mead or something at its eastern end.
Yeah.
But those are the two things I'm looking at right now. And then beyond that, really would need to get a lot of extra time to just sit down and kind of plot something. But I've got a couple really great ideas, and I just need a little bit more time to refine them before I'm ready to share them.
All right. This concludes our interview with Eric Poulin. He is currently hiking the Oregon Desert Trail. He's most of the way through it, about 130 miles left. This is day what?
36, I think, for me.
This is day 36.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So
just a few more to go, huh?
Yeah, hopefully I'm going to knock out another 15 miles or so after this and call it a day.
All right. Well, I hope it all goes well for you. We'd like to thank you for coming and joining us. It was great that we finally got together in a location that was right along your route to sit down and talk about what you do. His YouTube channel is called Seeking Lost. You definitely should go and check it out. He has a blog at seekinglost.com. You'll definitely want to check that out. You can follow him on Instagram. He puts a lot of really nice pictures out there. You'll definitely want to go and check those things out. He's got a lot of really good content out there. And we hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is something a little new. I'm going to try and feature more interviews with people that are out doing things on our public lands like Eric is. So we'd like to thank him for coming out. I appreciate it. And hopefully all of our viewers will too.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Hope to see you guys out there sometime.
So thanks for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.